Okay, here's the book. The Big Bang Never Happened. Eric J. Lerner. Okay, and I have an interest in science and philosophy and religion and so forth. As a Christian, I'm always interested in the nature of reality and how God created the universe. And to me, that's what science, that's really the meaning of science, is trying to sort of understand how God, as best we can. I mean, I don't think we're ever really going to understand it, but try to sort of understand, what God did. What was the procedure involved in, because the book of Genesis is, just kind of, glosses over him. Just kind of, doesn't really, it doesn't really explain how sort of it happened. It's just, except for he spoke it into existence, which, and by the way, not out of nothing. The idea of creation ex nihilo, creation out of nothing, is not really biblical. It's not. God already existed, so you couldn't have a condition called nothing, as if God was over here, and then over here you had this place called nothing, and then God created the universe into this place called nothing, and all of a sudden this creation was an addition to God's power, in the sense that, if you do that simple math equation, if you had God being all-powerful, omniscient, and omnipresent before the creation, and then if you added a creation to that, you're really adding to, you're saying, okay, the God plus the universe is more power than God alone, because there's an addition there. So it can't happen that way. What we call the creation universe was actually a subtraction, not an addition. It was a subtraction from God. Spatially speaking, dimensionally, what was added, maybe, if what was added maybe was information, because God informed reality to take this on this configuration that was suitable for finite beings. And by the way, when we get into this book, the author of this book agrees with me there. The whole idea of creation ex nihilo is not in the Bible, for one thing, and it doesn't make sense. Now, where I differ from this author is that his premise is that the universe is eternal, infinite in space and eternal in time, that it always existed, and it's always evolving into something more complex. Now, my difference is that although I believe the universe, even the one we experience, to be spatially infinite, the environment that we experience as finite beings in this universe had a beginning. In other words, the conditions that God set up began at a certain time, and I'm not absolutely positive. I don't absolutely know if it's just the 6,000 years, or if there was some pre-existing condition within what we would describe as our universe. Only maybe beforehand there was greater dimensionality, and there was even a transformation down from there, especially at the fall, when Adam and Eve fell into sin. There certainly seemed to be some kind of dimensional reduction. And I don't say that because I feel like I'm compelled to accommodate ancient Earth scenarios because of something so-called scientists or saying or anything like that. I just don't know if it's absolutely clear from the scriptures that there wasn't a pre-existing universe that was occupied by angelic beings, and there was the fall of Satan took place before the fall of man. Now my best friend has a theory that the fall of man and the fall of Satan were almost simultaneous, that it was the creation of man that caused Satan to fall. I mean, he may be right. I don't know. I'm just trying to figure this stuff out for myself. I don't have all the answers. The interesting thing is there is. I mean, you could, if you take a strictly 6,000 year universe as we experience it, then it would have to be done in some sort of upload fashion. It was uploaded with machinery already in motion. Things were already light, starlight and everything. These things were already in motion. Systems were in the same way. I mean, you could upload a video, for instance, that was, as soon as you press go, there's something already halfway across the screen in a particular trajectory. And it never really actually had the first half of the trajectory, or whatever the percentage was. I mean, you could just do things like that if it's information that it's ultimately, when you get down to the nature of the nature of reality, if it's information, if it comes down to just information, then it could, the 6,000 year commencement is not out of the question. If there's a way it could work that way. It's not like something that couldn't happen if it's just all information. So, it's kind of the simulated universe idea. But in this book, Lerner says that you had this, as far back as he can go, is this plasma current of 100 billion light years across. And I guess it would be several hundred billions of light years in length. They're these plasma, primordial plasma currents that he speaks about, have kind of the shape of a worm. They're not real long, but and they're not real wide either. They're just, here's some illustrations. Okay, and I'll get into explaining. This is sort of a Birkeland current here. Now this is interesting because it ties into the whole electric universe. If you're not familiar with Thunderbolt's project, or the electric universe project, then you really need to, because otherwise whatever you learned in school is obsolete in terms of cosmology. And so you want to keep up with the times. You don't want to be living in the 1960s. And I'm talking about in terms of popular cosmology, because I mean a lot of the foundations of this electric universe work and so forth go back to Birkeland and Christian Birkeland and Hans Elvin, and these guys, this early 20th century. So anyway, so his theory here, you got these plasma currents, and then what happens is they have an automatic motion of twisting around each other and pinching off and creating systems that then spin off and make smaller. So if you started with 100 billion light years across, and you have one that's 100 million, and then there's certain, in fact, it's even got kind of a quantized system of these currents can only be have certain dimensions that they scale up and down, but in kind of a quantized format. And so you have the one that pinches down into clusters of galaxies, and then one galaxies themselves create stars. And this is something new that I didn't really know before about the way he's treating the word galaxy. Galaxy is not a bunch of billions of stars. A galaxy is a plasma in which the stars are created. So first you start with the galaxy, then you get the stars. That's the way I understand what he's trying to say here. I guess I could read a little bit. I have lots to read, but let me go to page 243. There's some good graphics there. You should look at the graphics, I guess. I put this. That's probably here's your electrical currents, and there they go, and they come together, and they get tighter and tighter, and they eventually force something into a star, in other words, gravity wouldn't do it. Gravity wouldn't work, and it doesn't make sense. Gravity wouldn't pull gas together like that to any kind of condensed configuration. You need something stronger. You see, much stronger, and that's, of course, electromagnetism is zillions times stronger than gravity. Here's an interesting filamentary structure of the Orion Nebula. Okay, so you see he's got a kind of stringy kind of, okay. Okay, it's heated plasma surrounding stars. And those are the strands, are the sort of these plasma currents, the Birkeland currents that come together and force these dusts and materials and so forth together. There's pictures of Birkeland with some of his early experiments. Probably seen that picture before. I've seen that around here and there. That's right. He invented the electromagnetic cannon, which of course they do. They have now those rail guns, sort of. He invented one of those a long time ago. That was I wonder what year that was. 1901, 1902. See, that's going back a way. Okay. So you see now we have a whole new way of looking at cosmology and the way the solar system was formed. It wasn't done the way we were taught in school. Here's an interesting blackjack experiment. Blackjack 5, current flowing through wire filaments create a plasma which twists itself up into a spiral form. In this photograph, plasma is seen by the X-rays it emits. And so there's, it goes from the laboratory table all the way up to the size of the universe. These things scale up like that. All right, and of course, here's the computer simulations of galaxy formation. This guy's name, that was a guy named Peratt that came up with those, and I guess in the 60s or something like that. It's got, here's those graphics I was showing you before of these currents wrapping around, forming, oops, let me see if I can get that on the right angle there. Jeez. You know, I wish I had computer skills where I could make movies like everybody else does. I gotta hire somebody to do that. Let me see here. Okay, so now they oh, this is interesting. They have this. What happens in this in these filaments is sort of looking down on them, looking down on those currents. And it says here on this version of simulation showing magnetic lines of force. Okay, there's one's a simulation, the other one is an actual photograph of something that was made. Okay, let me see here. In the laboratory. Oh, here we go. Here's some great pictures. Okay, here's the plasma focus device that he works with in his laboratory. Okay, and basically, and you can look this up. I mean, there's a real good, you know, you can go on YouTube. There's a real good illustrations of what's going on there. That does this crazy thing where it is the plasma, the currents that wrap around each other, and they get and they pinch so tight, they make this thing called a plasmoid. Here it is looking down the barrel of the gun, so to speak, which is really interesting because there are you know, like nebular things in space that have that same configuration, you know, and there's sort of a like a photographic plate of where these electrons struck. Shows the impact made by the beam of electrons on plastic foil. The beam is about 40 microns in radius, while the individual filaments are only 1 or 2 microns in radius. Okay, and then there's the like a graphic of the pinch thing there, right between where those things really neck down into a real narrow. That's where you get this thing called the plasmoid. At the focus, the filaments annihilate each other, leaving only one, which necks off into a plasmoid. Shown schematically as it decays, the plasmoid emits 2 beams, each made up of tiny filaments organized into a helical pattern. And so this guy's doing this now in the lab. This is okay. This is a collapsing, rotating proto-galaxy. Generates an electrical current that spirals in toward the center and leaves along the axis. At the center, the filament carrying the current pinches into a plasmoid about 200 light years across. The plasmoid in turn generates a powerful electrical field along its axis, accelerating beams of protons and electrons. The small region from which these beams emerge, the region of highest magnetic field, is only half a light year across. And this is the visible quasar. So you know about the quasars, and okay, you know they try to come up with these crazy, you know, the crazy theories of black holes and spinning neutron stars and all this, and these guys, no, it's just you could do. They've already done it in the laboratory, and this is how it works, and this is what happens. And you get a beam of electrons coming out one end and protons coming out the other. They got a cosmic hierarchy. Okay, so this is what I was talking about, like being quantized, a cosmic hierarchy. There's a star is about half a solar mass, galaxies 0.3 trillion solar masses, a cluster 600 trillion solar masses, and a supercluster complex is 20,000 trillion. Okay, and they got, you know, there's there's another interesting thing here is this concept that smaller things are separated by greater distances. compared to themselves. So okay, here we go. The cosmic hierarchy. Objects in the universe are plotted in terms of two characteristics. One is their orbital velocity, the speed of an object at the surface must have to stay in orbit. The other is the ratio of their mass to either the radius squared or the square of the distance to the nearest neighbor. Okay, so let's see here. So anyways, the idea is that superclusters are not as far apart from each other as galaxies are, and this is terms of relative distance. And galaxies are not as far apart as stars and so forth. Radio telescope image of powerful radio galaxy Cygnus A. The fine lines extended out from the central dot illustrate the galaxy emitting jets or beams that are force-free filaments. Such beams break up into amorphous clouds of filaments and eventually disperse through intergalactic space, cooling and forming the dense microfilaments whose electrons scatter the microwave background. So here's a theory for why you got a microwave background other than the Big Bang. It's basically this idea that you can have these sort of local effects that they get dispersed, sort of like a light diffuser. The space acts as a light diffuser, and the electrons are going every which way, and eventually there's no particular direction. Okay, so here's this is from 1989. Oh yeah, by the way, this book was written in 91. Okay, so they made a lot of progress since then. But okay, after the February 1989 International Workshop on Plasma Cosmology, Hans Elfin, second from the left, relaxes with Tony Peratt at center, and the author at his home in San Diego, and that's Eric Lerner. And you can go to his plasma focus device. I forget exactly what his YouTube. He's got a YouTube channel, and they're doing experiments. They show you the lab. They show you a lot of it. He's got some interesting talks. Okay. Here's something else. The apparent radio brightness of galaxies is plotted against their distance. Radio brightness appears to fade rapidly with distance, implying radio waves are being absorbed or scattered by intergalactic medium. All right. Let's see here. What else? So, anyways, these are theories of doing away with the idea that microwave background is from the Big Bang, because according to him, there was no such thing as a Big Bang. And I agree with him. I don't think there was a Big Bang. I think there was but I don't agree with him that the universe as we know it is infinitely time-wise, chronologically infinite, or eternal, backwards and forwards. And I'm going to get into more of the sort of some of the other I don't know what you call premises of the book, because it's got multiple things going on. Okay, this is part of the pot of water heated from below sets up regular pattern of convection cells. Okay, so this ties into these theories, where people talk about emerging complexity. And I'm sure there's a certain amount of emerging complexity, but life is not part of it as far as I'm concerned. I don't, because obviously this guy, he's believes in evolution, which I don't think is, a practicable theory at all. I don't, it's not what we see in reality. We don't see evolution. We see there's certain things in each separate animal type has a limited amount of variation, and that's all. It's not, you know, I mean, how many different words can you spell with? It's almost like saying, you know, how many different words can you spell with dog? Well, you can't spell cat with dog, you know. I mean, it's almost, I mean, that's a very crude, simplified version of it, but that's actually the way of looking at it. Evolution of the universe. Okay, so he goes back 2 trillion years, which is not eternal. He doesn't know, you know, it's just he's, and so, okay, this is, you know, I'm trying to present what the, you know, this guy's ideas. Electromagnetic growth in magnetic filaments 2 trillion years ago. Gravitational electromagnetic formation, superclusters, clusters in galaxies and stars. Okay, that's 1 trillion, 100 billion, 10 billion, 1 billion. Nuclear, 20 billion. Formation of elements, 20 billion years ago. Biological on Earth, 4 billion. Single cells, 2 billion. Multi-cells, 600 million. Land dwelling, 300 million. Mammals, 60 million. Hominoids, 2 million. Social on Earth, 2 million. Humans, 50,000. Agriculture, 10,000. Bronze Age, irrigation and agriculture, 3,000. Iron Age, 1,500 years. Feudal agriculture, 1,000. Capitalist industrial, 400 years. And so one of the things he goes into philosophy, okay, the popular philosophy of why the Big Bang is sort of a defeatist worldview, and that in his worldview, you know, things keep progressing and evolving into more and more complex and you know, greater sophistication and so forth, and that the expectation is for things to just get better and better, sort of, and now we're at the point we're on the cusp of self-directed, you know, the directed evolution, which, by the way, is an oxymoron because once you start directing evolution, it's intelligent design. I mean, that's all there is to it. You can't get around that. Now, it's funny because somewhere in here he mentions that experiment. I can never remember the name of it. I'll look it up real quick here on the internet. Let's see if I can find it. Let's see here. There's a think primordial soup experiment. Let's just look at primordial soup experiment. Okay, and so because he mentions this, it's sort of you know, a lot of people, this is a fallback. They fall back on this. Yeah. Okay. All right. Let's see here. Primordial soup. Okay. Let's see if they mention the scientist. It's a famous experiment. For some reason, I always never remember the guys' names that did this thing. But you know who I'm talking about. They came up with this idea that you put these certain chemicals in the machinery, in the vats, and the test tubes or whatever, and there you got to boil this and you boil that and you separate this out, and you get, next thing you know, you get enzymes, building blocks of biology. And the thing is, all that proves is that you can make a machine that produces those enzymes. That's all it proves. It doesn't prove that it ever happened before naturally. Why is the guy got to make the machine? It should be happening all the time. Okay. And what they do, of course, they go back. You know, they go back. Oh, it happened. So you know, the conditions were different. You know, the conditions were, well, God created the universe in 6 days is set at different conditions too. By the way, you want to invoke different conditions, and You know, the evolution thing. But you know, it's like, okay, it's too subtle. You can't see it. It doesn't have, you know. So, I mean, you can make a theory that says trees walk. You know, trees walk. That the trees you have in your yard now, if you live like I do in Pennsylvania, you know, 100 million years ago, those trees were in South America. They walked up here, you know, and it's so slow you can't see it. It just, you know, it takes, you know, it's 1 angstrom every 100 years, and, you know. Okay, let's see here. I wonder if I want to actually read any of the book. I kind of like this, going through, looking at the illustrations and telling you about what the guys, the development of multicellular life over the past 600 million years. Okay, so this is where he refers to that thing. But I went back and looked for it. I should have wrote it down when, you know. But you all know what I'm talking about. I think it's Miller Urey or somebody like that. I don't know. Urey, girly Urey. I don't know. Anyways, so the whole theory of evolution thing here, I'm just going to throw that out because it doesn't mean anything to me. I thought this was interesting. Now here's infinity and free will. Infinity and free will. What could be more interesting passage, right? So that I wanted to highlight this because it actually, you could use this maybe if you know, they get into this idea of pre-crime, because he's this little passage here would be proof to say that, you know, there's no such thing as pre-crime. The ideas of continuous space leading to irreversible time also potentially resolve the paradox plaguing the concepts of consciousness and free will. In our universe, the future does not exist. There is a real now, the now of consciousness. The map of the future and the past laid out in the fourth dimension is merely an abstraction. Since one cannot, even with the greatest possible degree of knowledge, totally predict the course of the future, free will is indeed real. Even if a scientist were to know the exact location to 10 decimal places of every atom in a person's brain, he or she could not determine what the person would do next. This uncertainty is not the result of chance or of the quantum uncertainties we'll discuss in the next chapter. Rather, it is because the brain, too, is a complex and unstable system. Its behavior is determined by the interactions whose outcome can be radically changed by infinitely small shifts. Again, this would not be the case if the brain functioned as a digital computer, as many theorists of intelligence assume. Similarly, a digital computer, no matter how complex, cannot be intelligent because its every action is precisely predictable. One can perform the same operation over and over and without variation. However, experimental studies of the brain indicate overwhelmingly that it does not function in this manner. While neurons do send signals to each other along definite pathways, they also contribute to the formation of a general electromagnetic field within the brain. What is detected as the brain waves, or EEG, electroencephalogram, this ever-changing field in turn affects what each individual cell does. Like any such unstable system, the brain functions non-locally. That is, the behavior of every part is affected by every other part. The system acts as a whole. It is that total entity, the evolving cerebral flux and its electromagnetic field that must be connected with the phenomena of consciousness, with self-perception. And it is that overall unified system that determines a person's specific action and his or her general makeup. So you can't have pre-crime prosecution, because you can't know what a person's going to do. I guess I will read. There was an interesting, interesting passage here about you know how we've been taught in school that and you still hear this newspapers and National Public Radio and PBS and Nova and those guys, scientists are so dedicated to, being non-prejudiced, and they are, just want to know the truth, and there's not, and all that nonsense. So let's see, 264. This I thought was kind of interesting because he has an experience here that it's another case in point that disproves the idea that the scientific community is dedicated to seeking the truth. And there's so many of these cases, but there's another one here that just helps you understand the Big Bang in the New York Times. Okay, there was definite grounds for challenging the Big Bang, as we've seen. Tully's discoveries were far too massive for ancient for the Big Bang. And Tully's, we're talking about walls of galaxies, these complex superstructures. Yet they mesh neatly with the alternative models. It would take trillions of years or more to form the primordial filaments, but in a universe without a beginning, there was no rush. Tully's results quickly became a hot topic in cosmological circles. However, any alternative to the Big Bang remained almost unknown, since plasma cosmology was routinely rejected by astrophysical journals, and our papers were published only in plasma physics journals, which astronomers never read. I was, however, offered a golden opportunity to break the news. A friend of mine, Randy Rothenberg, had recently been hired as an editor specializing in science articles in the New York Times Magazine. In January of 1986, he called to ask if I had any good articles to write for the magazine. I immediately suggested an article on Alphen and the plasma universe. Randy was enthusiastic and won over the magazine editors, who gave me a contract. At last, I was to meet Alphen and Peratt, whom I had thus far known only by phone. In March, I interviewed Alphen in Washington, D.C., as he traveled from San Diego to Sweden. In his courtly way, Alphen carefully went over his ideas on the problems of the Big Bang and the development of the plasma universe concept. He warned me that he thought it was premature for an article on the Big Bang, that instead the article should focus on his more established theories of the solar system. Wait here, he advised. I think the time will be riper next year to talk about the Big Bang. The advice turned out to be prescient, but I couldn't follow it. I had a contract with one of the most widely read publications in the world, and the Times editors were eager to see why the Big Bang might be wrong. The next month, I was off to Los Alamos to meet with Peratt. Peratt showed me his computer simulations of galactic formation, and we discussed our respective theories as he showed me and my family around the Indian ruins and the surrounding Los Alamos. On the last night of our visit, I went to his house to try to see Halley's Comet, then nearing the Earth. It was just a fuzzy blur, but the night the sky was spectacular through the Los Alamos' clear, dry air. The Milky Way poured across the heavens in a brilliant arc, dotted here and there with globular clusters which could be seen easily with the naked eye. This was the sky our ancestors saw before the coming of electricity. It takes no leap of imagination to recognize why they believed that what happens on Earth reflects the awesome spectacle in heavens. But I was soon to learn it was still difficult for people to change their views of the heavens. After much writing and rewriting, my article for the Times was ready in full, ready in the fall. Randy conveyed the news that the article had not only been accepted, but was to be the cover story on the October 26th issue. I was elated, but not for long. 2 weeks before publication, the article was canceled. It had been routinely sent to the science section of the daily paper for review. Walter Sullivan, who 25 years before had proclaimed the confirmation of the Big Bang in a front-page news article, had vetoed it. He had dismissed Alphen as a scientist well known for his maverick ideas that Sullivan asserted had no support even within the plasma physics community. For a week or so, Randy and I scrambled to refute Sullivan's brief note. He dug through the Times morgue to show Alphen's enormous prestige in the field, and I gathered up letters from various plasma physics notables, but the decision was made. So, there is the scientific world in full force. That's really the way it works. This is kind of an interesting. Brain researchers have found that the overall pattern of brain's electromagnetic field correlates with what the subject is thinking. in experiments performed by Robert Chapman and co-workers at the University of Rochester, subjects were shown words grouped into 6 categories, such as good words like beautiful and bad words like crime. Each connotation gave rise to distinctive patterns in time that a computer could use to guess what the category of words the subject had just seen. Plotting patterns in space over the surface of the brain, Warren Brown and Dietrich Lehmann, working at the University Hospital Zurich, Switzerland, found that the EEG, or brainwave patterns, of many different subjects were broadly similar. Here too, different patterns emerge when an identical sounding word is used with 2 different meanings. Different types of sensations produce markedly different brainwaves patterns. Errol Basser of the Lubeck Institute of Physiology found here an auditory stimulus top has an entirely different pattern than a visual stimulus bottom. In all these cases, coherent electromagnetic pattern is produced by the brain as a whole, with billions of neurons acting in concert. And so they used a word that has, well, I always do that. They used a word that the same word that has 2 different meanings, and the brain had a different pattern for each different meaning. Obviously, I guess that's not too surprising. Okay. All right. So he gets into this big, long rigmarole about how his theory, that if society views the universe as being eternal and always heading towards more and more complexity and so forth, it's an optimistic viewpoint, and that like the Christian worldview, or a lot of the not just Christian but monotheistic worldview, where you got a judgment day coming, and that kind of thing in the world. It's going to be in the Bible. The elements will melt. It says at the very end, the elements will melt and everything. Sort of going to return to that pre-universe state. He doesn't like that. He's I don't know. How do you prove? See, how do you prove that the universe is going to go on infinitely in the future, the universe that we know? You just have to wait around for infinity and see what happens, And now, how do you prove there's going to be a judgment day someday? Well, you wait around, same thing. You wait around and see if it happens, Okay, what's this about here? Let me see. Something about decay products, standard models. Oh yeah, he had pretty good. It's a lot of really interesting stuff. I don't know if people want me to go into all the time to do this. Okay, it gets into quantum mechanics, Bell inequality, and how it just something's going on there. Defies statistically what should happen. Let me see. I'll just read a little bit of this, just out of the blue. Let me see. I'll just pick it up and read a little bit. This can't be considered strange because the conventional view of quantum mechanics, the view taught in every physics department today, introduces magic into the heart of science. Ultimately, it is assumed that quantum phenomena are acausal, that there is no cause for the decay of a nucleus at a particular instant or the emission of a photon. These things just happen. And when the basic principle of causality, that everything is caused by something else, is abandoned, magic can become quite acceptable. To be sure, the majority of scientists who use quantum mechanics don't think about these matters very much and don't believe in magic, but the magical nature of quantum transition is central to the standard interpretation of the theory nonetheless. Like the other paradoxes of modern physics, the contradictions of quantum mechanics are in effect swept under the rug. Many articles are written about them, but they tend to conclude, isn't the universe bizarre? No articles within the mainstream of physics view the contradictions as somehow implying that despite the theory's great success, they are limited in some fundamental way. And that's what I think too, especially nuclear decay. You just need a shower of neutrinos to strike, or even gamma rays or cosmic rays. They're super high energy. If they strike the nucleus at if the nucleus is revolving around at certain ways, there's going to be certain points where it'll get in there and split, just like with splitting wood. Certain angles, you hit that wood, and the certain right down the center of the grain, split the wood easy, and so that's sort of, to me that's why, and that's why it seems seemingly random, because of course the cosmic rays, or if it's a neutrino, whatever, is going to come in such unpredictable times, but it's still a cause. It's not. And as far as non-locality, say in entangled photons and entanglement, that just means that most of your electron exists in greater dimensionality, and that's where this it's really in almost like a Dirac C. You got almost like you got one electron only, anyways, and they're all connected extra dimensionally. Now, a lot of people refuse to accept the fact that there could be extra dimensions because they can be deduced, but they can't be detected. I would say that an entanglement experiment is a way of detecting extra dimensions. That's how I look at it. That's the way how you detect it. Why is this wave state collapse taking place in a distance, any distance you can imagine from one entangled photon to the next? Why is that happening? Because that's evidence of extra dimensions. That's the way it would work. So that's how I look at it, anyways. So let me see if there's any really interesting conclusions here. It's interesting because he knows, for instance, he does say that that there's a corrupt system, a Federal Reserve and all that. You get these corrupt system. He even though he has the wrong interpretation of World War II, for instance, he thinks that he takes the standard narrative on World War II, which is not right at all. It's not really whatever we learned back in the school days is all wrong. That's not how World War II came down. Okay, let's see here. This is a chapter on society in crisis. Yeah, that's what I was saying. I should probably maybe want to read. That's kind of interesting. Let's see here. Okay, 1710, the new Cummins steam engine was invented. 1770, the Watt steam engine. 1790, gas lighting. 1800, batteries. 1810, steamboat. 1820, electromagnetism and photography. 1830, electric motor and telegraph and locomotive. 1850, Bessemer still process. 1860, typewriter. 1870, electric dynamo dynamo, electric light, microphone, telephone. 1880, phonograph. 1890, automobile, motion picture, radio, tape recorder, x-rays. 1900, airplane. 1920, television. 1940, computer, radar, transistor, nuclear energy. 1950, laser, satellite, space probe. And nothing since then. There's nothing worth mentioning since. Okay, consequences of cosmology. It is in this context of the social crisis that the effects of the scientific revolution and of the concomitant debate in cosmology must be judged. What we find is that the old ideas of cosmology tend to reinforce and are reinforced by society's dominant ideas, but the new ideas undermine the ideology with an alternative set of conceptions, as subversive in their own way as was the Copernican cosmos in its time. These ideas point to new society and a renewal of progress. So he's thinking that if we get on board with this idea of an infinite universe evolving into greater and greater complexity and so forth, then we will accelerate the process. And I mean, there is something about, optimistic thinking that, it does bear optimistic fruit, and pessimistic thinking. But you still want to be attached to reality. You just can't have a wish dream or a rainbow in the sky or pie in the sky kind of, thinking that that's really going to, he calls it the fashionable intellectual pessimism pervades society, general aimlessness and despair, which becomes obvious in an explosion of greed and selfishness. When things fall apart, when there seems no clear way forward, when no alternative is apparent, the response is to save oneself from general debacle. I'll get mine, the devil take the hindmost. I don't know necessarily how far you can go with this idea that, you can't really change. It doesn't. Your cosmology still has to be based on reality. It can't just come up with something that sounds more optimistic. I said, therefore, it must be true. Let me see here. I know he's gonna put down occultism, he calls it. Here we go. All such occultism and fanaticism rejects the testimony of experience and places faith in authority. In the early stages of a crisis like today's, such authority may seem innocuous. The quaint guru whose followers are at worst a bit gullible. But in the past, such belief in the occult has, in times of more desperate crises, been channeled into mass irrational worship of race, land, and Volk. In Germany, the same people who quaintly worship nature in the Wandervogel, a decade later expressed their mystical unity with Germany as stormtroopers. The seemingly innocuous authority of local guru was replaced with the authority of national leader, the Fuhrer. Which I don't agree with that assessment either, because really Germany was reacting, they were being attacked by even a more sinister force, the international banker, and so they were justified in trying to defend themselves. I don't see them as being ultimate evil. They were really fighting the ultimate evil. That's, you got to put that, you got to get your history right, your geopolitics correct too. It helps you to form the most realistic of worldviews. Okay, the authority of deductive science is used to defend the rule of experts in society. For example, Alexei Boyko, an economic advisor to the then-Soviet President Gorbachev, continuously dismissed the proposal for a referendum on price increases and a market economy as akin to trying to solve a problem in higher mathematics by voting on it. What need is there for voting when the correct policies can be derived through pure reason of those in authority? Similar arguments have been used in the United States to defend the decisions of the Federal Reserve Bank from the interference of the electorate. Moreover, the methods and assumptions of conventional cosmology and fundamental physics reject scientific method and thereby disarm science in the face of irrationality and occultism. Here, after all, the world of electrons, photons, even entire universes popping into existence without cause, a world governed by neither causality nor logic. The criterion of truth is not fidelity to observation or experiment, but the subjective beauty of equations, the symmetries plumbed from the mind of the scientist or the mind of God, ultimately the authority established physicist and end of established ideas. There's no coincidence that the ideas such science are now used to lend credence to the channeling of departed spirits and other such occult matters. Okay, so so you see, he generally is down on faith-based systems, but he has faith in his own system. He's not nothing proven there, but he does have better science, and the electric universe guys have better science than the gravitational crowd. That's all there is to it. It's much better science. What is replacing the Stalinist regimes is not democracy, but a return to the rabid nationalism of the interwar period. The threatened balkanization and disintegration of all Eastern Europe, Soviet Union. In Poland, political leaders again blame the Jews. In Romania, statues are being erected to Antonescu, the wartime fascist dictator. And throughout the area, old ethnic enmities are being rekindled. In the meantime, the national wealth is being sold off at bargain prices to foreign investors. It was happening back in the 90s. But my objection to this is that nationalism is not an evil thing. That nationalism, the way human beings were created. Okay, and if you were an evolutionist, the way human beings evolved is in cultural settings that most people are followers. There's a few leaders. Nationalism is a good way to provide firewalls against some kind of world control system. And so, if you're really going to have, you're going to try to develop a worldview that's going to be ultimately a good solution, it's got to include nations. It's got to include nationality, and nationalism has to be accepted and included. If you try to get rid of that, then you are a control freak, and you're going to end up destroying a lot of people. People are free to start their own nations and so forth. The idea that people should do away with even monarchies or whatever is evil, because it's a control freaks trying to control everything. And so you should be pro nationalism. I think if you really want to accommodate human beings and you want freedom, that's how freedom is procured, through nationalism, and allow people the freedom of association, and to have a nation based on whatever common denominator they want, whether it be race or philosophy or religion or whatever. Okay. Let me just read the last page, just in case there's anything important. In every system, be it physical or social, there are times when small events determine the course of ensuing events, either forward to new or higher plane, or backward, cut off by the barriers of the old society. Society stands at such crossroads now at the end of the second millennium. If it falls backwards, then the present embryonic scientific revolution will be swept away in the general retreat, becoming like Aristarchus' heliocentric theory, a mere footnote to a debacle. What happens now depends in part on what people think, and this in turn rests on how they view the universe and how they believe truth can be known. To know the truth about the universe and our own society, must we rely on the authority of experts who can fathom the mystery of pure reason? Or does our own freedom rest on the ability of all to defend truth through observation and the testing of ideas in practice? Must thought and action be forever separate? The rulers and the ruled, or can those who do work decide what work is to be done? Do we live in a finite universe doomed to decay, or where humans are insignificant transitory specks on a tiny planet? Or are we instead the furthest advance of an infinite progress in a universe that has neither beginning nor end? Will our actions today have no meaning in the end of all things, and are we now being swept into that inevitable decay? Or does what we do here and now permanently change the cosmos, a change that will echo through the limitless future? How we answer these questions affects which road we take, whether we fall back despairing within a finite world or move forward into the infinite universe. So, and he, hopes that the optimism will eventually translate into funding for his his project, which I hope he gets funding. I hope it succeeds. He's really interesting. You got to look him up, Eric J. Lerner, and his laboratory doing fusion physics to basically using currents to produce energies that will cause fusion, and with actually without radioactive products, or very very little radioactive products, and he's using light elements. I think it's boron, and that's what he's fusing with helium or hydrogen or something like that. But at any rate, I want to look at his last statement there. He's making this assumption, and he's got a good sentiment. You want to find the truth. Here's the thing, and I remember a friend of mine was taking a course on religion and correspondence from Harvard University. It was one of the things that the guy was saying is that you can't prove or disprove God, and I disagree with that. And you could take the claims of the Bible and subject them to the same kind of test that you would use or anything else for determining whether it's trustworthy or not. And so you could use the scientific method on the Bible, and the way you would do that is first of all, you can do it through history. You can see what it says, some of the true, the history claims, and that's one way of doing it, and that way of the Bible's proven itself over and over again in terms of the accuracy of its historical narrative. There's been, you go back 30 years or so, and it was common for the critics to say, well, the Bible talks about this Hittite society, there was never such a thing, and blah blah blah. Now there's a whole bunch of stuff found to corroborate the Bible presentation of the history back then. And the same things happened numerous times. There's a really good book, if you haven't read it, the Case for Christ and the Case for Faith, and those two books. And the author cites a professor who, one of the authors was actually one of these professors, set out to disprove the Bible. And one of the things they used to say about there was no such proconsul as Pilate and so forth. And then they find a stone that refers to the proconsul and Pilate and so forth. And these kinds of things happen over and over again. And a lot of skeptics have become believers because of they put the Bible to the scientific test. And the other way is prophecy. It's very similar. The way you do that is, you see, was there a prophecy made, and was it fulfilled, and what's the likelihood of being able to prophesy such a thing and having it fulfilled in such a way. And these are, when you look into them, you can find enough evidence to, I found enough evidence to support, justify faith in the Bible. So when it talks about cosmology and other things, this is a scientific way of saying, okay, I'm going to trust that this particular witness to these events is telling the truth. In this case, the witness would be God himself, and working through people in the Holy Spirit to give him this information that had to come from an extra-dimensional point of view, that he was able to see what the future holds. Now, there's two different ways of looking the mechanisms of the way God can do this. One of them, you could even have God who doesn't know. He doesn't, the future hasn't happened yet for him. He knows the future because he's going to construct it through, in a very similar way to Maxwell's demon, in the sense that he's going to use quantum phenomena, and he's going to rig things in such a way that the outcomes that he desires going to take place. The other way to do it is actually say that history actually has already played out for God. He's got this view. He's got this eternal view that actually has the entire history of civilization is already all in view for him. And so it's just he already knows that it's going to happen because he saw that part of the movie already, or whatever you want, however you want to put it. I don't know. I don't know what to do with this at that point. This. I don't really have a particular, side take on that. I guess if more evidence comes in one way or the other, how he's doing this. It does seem kind of strange if, it would be kind of strange if the future is coming to God the same way that it comes to us. In other words, like Lerner was saying in the book, that it doesn't exist yet. It's just, we come into it. It's very strange. The whole idea of flow of time and so forth, and it could be a derivative dependent on motion. If things move, you have, in a sense, it creates time. If everything stood still, there wouldn't be any time. But that's why I don't really think that, I don't know if I buy this idea that God is outside of time. Like there's such a place. It's a bit like being outside of space. It's like, okay, you could do that if there's extra dimensions of space. But this kind of idea that thinking that, God is somewhere, like this creation ex nihilo thing that doesn't make any sense, where God was sort of in this, he was, I don't know, he had to exist somehow. How do you exist if there's no such thing as a place to exist? That doesn't make sense. But so my idea is he had to exist, and he already occupied all of space. So our space already existed. There wasn't the creation of space. It already always existed because God was already omnipresent. And you can't be omnipresent if there's another place over here called nowhere, and consisting of nothing. That can't work. So that's why I sort of have the kind of a hard time thinking that time is occurring, the future is, coming to God as something new that he was not necessarily aware of. You could still, fulfill prophecy, stuff like God could still get what he wants by adjusting the conditions. But the thing is, you really have to sort of have control of the conditions before they present themselves in our, in our sort of collapsed wave state of experience. You could have this idea where God is presenting in other words, the future's not unknown to him. It doesn't look like it does to us either. It's going to look like the future's going to look like it does to us, to God, when it happens. But there is sort of this thing called a future that he has that's undetermined. And so he's presenting to us this undetermined environment, a space-time environment, and he's allowing us whatever aspects of that universe that hasn't been determined yet. The part in our brains, for instance. That's why I like Stuart Hameroff and Roger Penrose's theories on quantum consciousness. That we do have a sovereignty and a jurisdiction over those wave states in our brains. We don't have as much control over. This is why reality presents itself to the human race in such a way that we can agree on things. We don't have different interpretations that are so different we're unable to communicate. I mean, how can we build, for instance, How can you have an orchestra or, you know, build these incredible complex machineries and so forth without people having a dependable form of communication that relies on the fact that the, you know, wave states of objective reality has already been determined, so that if you're not looking, the moon is there, yes, because God's aware of it. So God's the one that ultimately has determined most of the reality and left us a little bit that's in our minds, that we can have an undetermined reality presented to us for free will. So it's not like the whole future that God has is, you know, unresolved until He presents it to us and we resolve it. You know, this is one of the problems with this book and a lot of you know, modern cosmology, is the idea that, you know, humans want to put themselves in God's place as the ones determining reality. And I'll tell you what, it's just ridiculous, because if we really determined our reality, why aren't we all living, you know, in Paradise Island somewhere? I mean, you know, why, you know, why, that's be a no-brainer. We would already have heaven, you know, would already be here. But God has determined that we need to go through this experience to learn. There's things we need to learn that we wouldn't learn if it was just up to us. We would just all be, I guess, extremely greedy and want, you know, we'd want, I mean, I'm still that way. I mean, I still like to win the lottery, for instance. I don't want to work every day, you know. God has other ideas. I have to do that, you know. I have to work for a living, you know. So, and I suppose it's because, you know, there's lessons we need to learn, you know. And I think it's a bad idea if you know, don't come up with a worldview that makes you God. You know, I don't think that's a good idea. You're gonna miss out on what the real God has. And, you know, there's a great evidence to say that, you know, there's a God. The idea that, okay, the moon is there before you look at it. It's already there. You know, it's so much of the world, so much of the universe, and so much of what we experience is consistent from moment to moment, day to day. It's got the kind of consistency that allows us. There's enough predictability to allow us to function properly. If things were so unpredictable like that, you know, I mean, what if, you know, you decide that, you know, in order to make yourself happy, you need something that belongs to me, you know? What, you know, you would just take it, and vice versa. You see, that's why the world wouldn't work that way. That's why you can't, you know, it can't work that way. So I'm looking forward to the next phase in the universe that's controlled by God, and then, you know, in the Bible, the prophecies are for an eventual judgment day, a return of Christ, and a new beginnings, a new heaven and a new earth. It says God will wipe away every tear, and, you know, there'll be no more diseases and all this sort of thing. And I don't, you know, I have no reason to believe that God can't pull that off. You have the power to control the whole quantum universe, the whole quantum mechanisms of the universe and so forth. God's in a position to present the as of yet undetermined realities that He, you know, allows us to, and so forth. Then He can do all these other things, you know. There's the paradigm shifts. There's some interesting passages in the Bible about, for instance, the children of Israel wandering for 40 years and their shoes didn't wear out. And things like this, you know, these little subtle things that you might not pay attention to when you're reading the Bible. I'll say, wait a minute, this is kind of an interesting, so God can, do these sorts of things. That the result of the fall. There's the fall, and there's places in the Bible where God has prevented that fall from affecting things. One of my favorite things about is with Jesus and feeding the 5,000 with a few loaves of bread and a few fish. Like 5 loaves of bread or 7 loaves of bread, whatever. That's the creation process. This is if we want to investigate, you want to be scientific, let's look at how he could have done that. What was the mechanism? And so if you have this cosmology that I have, where there was already an infinite space and there was already infinite energy, God didn't add to those things, but the configurations were different. The space and energy environment that God exists in is different than ours. Obviously, I would think that it's more powerful and more spatially, dimensionally space, more dimensions of space. And so that is there already, and Jesus just had to inform that there's pre-existing conditions to turn into fish and to turn into bread. And so that's why I also have no problem with just having this whole thing created at once, with informational homogeneity, that the information was already homogeneous to the entire universe when God needed it to be. It's just programmed in there. It's just there. You don't have to wait billions of years. You don't have to wait, millions of years or anything like that. It's just he just uploaded it in such a way. There's nothing unscientific about that, So, and that's my hobby, sort of kind of trying to figure out, well, how did God do this? How did that's, to me, that's science. How did God create the universe? Not, this thing, how it happened. And by the way, if you have an infinite universe that spatially and time-wise, what about the energy-wise? What's the energy content and density and so forth? And how come? How do you get around the old bush paradox? How do you get around the fact that if everywhere you look, your eye will focus on a star, then how come the night sky is not bright? That's an interesting question. What happens to all this energy? How do you have this infinity of progression? And if it was infinitely, eternally in the past, how did we ever get here? Or how come we didn't pass this point infinitely long ago? It's just, it makes it all of a sudden, you have extremely unique conditions here, where we just so happen to be, at this point in infinity, eternity and so forth. Could we ever have gotten here if the past was eternal like this? You have to have, that's why you had to have a paradigm shift. You had to have a creation event like the Bible describes it, where God informs, he speaks it into existence. It's been informed. All the power needed was there already. Everything is there. It just needs to be informed. That's what speaking is, informing. When we talk, we vibrate the air in such a way we're sort of informing the air to perform this communication. And that's God's informing the the whole energy density to take on these particular formations that for us, provide for finite beings. So, anyway, that's the Big Bang never happened. That's my kind of take on it. That it's an interesting theory. I like the fact that the guy's a pioneering, original thinker. I just don't dismiss the idea that you can determine the Bible as being a reliable authority because of its past performance. That's what faith is. Faith is trusting somebody based on the past performance, and that's sort of that's my reason for believing. I also had a subjective experience, subjective emotional experience when I became a believer. Before I had all this evidence, so some people get the evidence first. Some people get the experience first, and believe it or not, even though I'm so evidence and scientific minded and so forth, it just has happened that mine was experiential first, and I don't use my subjective experience though as a proof for anything. Except for that it happened. To me, it's a proof. But there's all kinds of people having subjective experiences and claiming, interpretations of what the experiences are. The subjective experience I had was informed later, more clearly, by the evidence of history and the documentation and so forth of the scriptures and that kind of thing. One of the things you can look at is great evidence that the Bible, God, Jesus knows what He's talking about. Is the idea where does evil come from and how because this idea if people were born perfect, then they would never not be perfect because you would have a perfect society because if it was going to be made up of perfect beings. Where did they learn the imperfection? Did we learn it from pets? Maybe we got pets, and the pets we watch pets behaving. We watch animals behaving improperly, and we took up on that. Is that how we? Is that the human race? Because So where does it come from? Now, of course, you can say, well, we'll look at Adam and Eve. They had all this going for them in terms of near perfection. They were perfect, but weak, and they did decide. They made the wrong choice at one point, and so the expectation is that we would all have done the same thing, only maybe sooner. And of course, the fact that we've inherited this fallen nature makes it all the more impossible that we would not fall, in ourselves. So, there's that bit of evidence, and there's a million other things. Evidences. There is, the Bible does have philosophically. There's some things that are difficult to embrace. They have to be taken on faith because philosophically, it's like, wow, this is kind of, if you think this through, it doesn't look good, but that's just an opinion. It's a philosophical opinion from somebody who doesn't know everything. It's funny. I was listening to a guy on this was an old Red Ice interview of a guy who was an Islamic scholar who was like a Caucasian guy, white guy who converted to Islam, and he's saying he's basing his faith on history, but then when he gave a reason why he rejects the Old and New Testament. Neither one of them were based on history; they were both based on philosophy and personal sentiments, and that's not history. And so to me, the history is, did Jesus raised from the dead? Did he live and do those things he said, and did he raise? Did he come back to life and what after he was killed and so forth? Is that that would be history, if that actually happened, then that's how history works. There's an event that actually took place, in the course of time and space. And those you can't argue with. Whether you can understand them or not, that's a different story. And then you could really say that about reality itself, the nature of reality. The nature of reality is not something that's just really easily understood. It's not something that's easily understood. It's the way the nature of reality. We're here. We know that. You can't deny that we exist. But explaining because this guy he doesn't even doesn't really explain where the universe just always existed. Well, that's the same reason we give for God. God always existed. The only thing is which is a better explanation, and does the universe have its documentation like God does? God has documented through the course of history, and we can test. We have that ability to sort of test. What God said, is it true, or is it right? And so, anyway, that's it. I think I've spoke enough on this topic, and I'm just publishing my previous video. I just made another video. War's a Racket, and why General Patton was murdered. If you haven't seen those, that was a previous video. And next time I get inspired, I'll see you guys again. We'll make another video, and hope you enjoy this. And unfortunately, I'm not as active as I should be on YouTube. I post these videos usually, and I rarely revisit them. I don't know what the best way. If you wanted to talk to me, it's really my fault. I really should visit my videos and see what people are saying and respond to them. It would be, I guess, the polite thing to do. I just don't have time. Time is killing me. I got too many interests and so little time. All right, thanks for watching, and subscribe and pass it on if you thought my ideas were worth sharing.